our next speaker. Really pleased to have Ethan Davis show up on our podium this afternoon. Ethan's been a forecaster with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center since 2015. He started skiing at a little ski area I've never heard of, Anthony Lakes in Eastern Oregon. But then he attended University of Idaho with a Bachelor of Science in Geography, Mathematics, and then a Master's in Meteorology from Penn State University. And we're just thrilled to have Ethan as a forecaster over in the Sawtooth. And he applied his prodigious intelligence and curiosity into doing a project for the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, the Bridger Teton, the Gallatin, and the Utah Avalanche Center. And he's going to tell you of his research, his findings. Ethan, welcome.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. This presentation highlights work of the East Idaho Avalanche Working Group, and we are formed essentially to reduce avalanche accidents in eastern Idaho. So as mentioned in the introduction, while I technically work for the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, this was a collaboration through research of the National Avalanche Center and the surrounding avalanche centers that surround eastern Idaho, including the Gallatin, Bridger Teton, and Utah Avalanche Center. And since we're here locally, I am wearing the appropriate hat as well. So as I'm sure most of you know, East Idaho is booming. How many of you guys, just by a show of hands, go over to Idaho to go ski or ride during the wintertime? Good, cool. So we have a good cross-pollination of folks then. That's what I was hoping to see. You know, a theme of this research and why I'm really here and why I was asked to be here is to kind of have you guys realize how much you guys do cross-pollinate and how important both sides of this pass are, and kind of bring a little bit of statistics and analysis from the east side and some of the particular avalanche problems that we have going on over there. And hopefully that resonates as a community as a whole, and less of its problems for Idaho or its problems for Wyoming. But I think as you guys both kind of go back and forth over the pass all the time, that hopefully this is something that you guys are proud of, the fact that you have a pretty diverse community on both sides of this pass. So bringing it back to Idaho, we have three of the fastest growing counties in the state, which are Madison, Bonneville, and Bannock counties. And these are home to Rexburg, Idaho Falls, and Pocatello. And Idaho is actually the second fastest growing state in the nation currently, just behind Utah, and well ahead of Texas in third. Unfortunately, the population isn't the only thing that's growing. We have a rapidly growing problem with avalanche fatalities in eastern Idaho, which is really the basis of this study. A rash of accidents, including 11 deaths in just 5 years, occurred in 2016 to 2021. 11 deaths in 5 years in just eastern Idaho on the west side of the pass here. The most recent was a tragic avalanche accident on December 17th of 2021. Actually, Teton County SAR took these pictures, or at least one of those pictures. And what I want to point out right away is that this is hard probably for some of you to see. You might have known these kids, or you might have been involved in the rescue itself. It's also actually hard just to research and present. And I want to make sure that everybody realizes that while I'm using dots and figures and statistics here, that we remember that each one of those dots was a person. And in this case, it was two 17-year-old boys that were caught and killed in an avalanche outside of Driggs. So what the working group really wanted to establish was that we needed to understand this problem in order to develop a better solution to fix it. And the first thing we needed to understand is, where are these accidents happening? And surprisingly, this data didn't exist already. So the first thing that I did 2 summers ago was compiled this map of avalanche accidents using a database dating back to 1950. And if you take a quick picture of this, and I hope you do, I'll leave it up here for a second, you'll see an online map, an ArcGIS online map, that shows you not only where the accidents are, but you can click on the dot, and if there is any information that goes to an accident report, you can get that kind of information as well. You'll also notice that this map is pretty interactive. You can zoom and pan around to different parts of Idaho. You can see avalanche center zones. You can see slope angle. You can toggle those on and off. You can look at motorized accidents, non-motorized accidents, ones since 2000 or historical, all sorts of different ways that you can bin this data. You can look at snowmobile trails. So it is a pretty interactive resource. So the first question was, where are these occurring? We established that with the map. The next question we wanted to answer is who is getting caught? So first I'll highlight some statewide trends, but I won't spend a lot of time before drilling down right into just eastern Idaho specifically. So this graph shows accidents on the vertical axis and years on the horizontal axis. And if you see the taller the bar, the more accidents there were for that given year. And one thing that stands out right away is this kind of increase in avalanche accidents starting in the mid-90s. Does anyone want to throw out an idea of why that might have been the case? Yeah, there was a big increase in snowmobile technology right around that time. So instead of using snowmobiles in the flats, riders were getting into steeper, more consequential terrain more frequently. And that accounts for some of that increase. In fact, in Idaho, as you'll see in the following stats, it accounts for most of that increase, as we'll see. The two most fatalities that we've seen in this historical record are the years of 2010 and the year of 2020. So this chart breaks it down further by user group. And what you'll see is that 45 motorized users have died in Idaho. Remember, this is the entire Idaho data set still, accounting for 51% of the avalanche fatalities in the state of Idaho. And when I refer to motorized, it's snowmobilers, which account for 44, and one snow biker that passed away in the Centennial Mountains, which brings that up to 45. There's some other notable stats, I think, if you take a quick look closer at this graph. One that stands out is the larger number of inbounds avalanche fatalities. That's actually the second most prevalent user group, even ahead of backcountry tourers, which include skiers and snowboarders in the state of Idaho. And actually, this was a recent change that inbound skier fatalities jumped over backcountry riders just in 2020. And if you recall, there was an accident up at Silver Mountain in northern Idaho that buried 5 skiers and killed 3 of them. So now we'll drill down a little bit into East Idaho. And we'll roughly define East Idaho as kind of what's inside this red box here. We're also just looking at data from 2000 on. So we're really looking at the modern data now in eastern Idaho. So this is the same plot as shown before, except we're really just 2000 and on in East Idaho. And now we're starting to see that snowmobilers really are essentially the primary and only avalanche fatalities that we're seeing in the state, in this portion of the state. Snowmobilers if I say motorized users, including snow bikers, account for 76%. But if we start to break down that data just a little bit more, hybrid rider is what we classify as folks that are using both snowmobiles and skis or other means together. And those two 17-year-old boys in the big holes were classified as a hybrid rider. So if you, depending on how you'd like to slice it, you can consider that they were using motorized means to access the terrain, so you could consider them a motorized user as well. The resident was a roof avalanche, and if we kind of take that out because they weren't deliberately exposing themselves to avalanche terrain, we'll keep that aside. Similar to the side country rider, who was a skier that ducked a rope in Pebble Creek a few years back. So they weren't deliberately accessing necessarily backcountry terrain, knowingly exposing themselves to hazard. And what we're left with is essentially motorized riders. Another way to look at it is comparing it to what the rest of the nation is experiencing. And if we have 76% of our recent accidents in East Idaho are motorized users, and we compare that nationally, only 37% of total accidents in that same time period are national, or are snowmobilers or snow bikers. So what this is really saying is that snowmobilers are dying at a much higher rate in eastern Idaho than they are in the rest of the country. If we look at backcountry skiers on the flip side, we can see that there have been no backcountry tour fatalities in eastern Idaho since 2000, but they account for roughly 29% of the accidents nationally. So digging a little bit deeper into this data, I had to go through, unfortunately, a whole bunch of obituaries, accident reports, and the like to try to tease out some of the important details to try to give a little bit more context. Because again, the point here isn't to give a very solemn or a very sad presentation. The point is to highlight the things that are patterns that we can identify as problems and then have a better way to address them. One of the more particularly sad findings in this study was that 6 of the last 7 victims that were killed in East Idaho had no beacon. The beacon had dead batteries, or it was turned off and it was in their pocket at the time of the accident. And this is particularly alarming because we're talking about avalanche accidents that are all in the last 5 years. And depending on which community you grew up in, you're thinking, oh, wow, all this in the last 5 years, like I thought everybody had beacons and probe and shovel. That's just the standard operating procedure. Well, there are certain hurdles, and East Idaho has a lot of hurdles because they're a different user group that hasn't, motorized users haven't had the same privilege as backcountry skiers that have been growing up in these places that have avalanche forecasts and avalanche education for years and years and years. So they have more boundaries to overcome, and I think that this is kind of teased out in some of this data right here. I did say 6 of the last 7, so that other group did have a full rescue kit, but unfortunately all 4 people were caught on the same slope. The gentleman that passed away was fully buried. 2 of them were buried to their waist, and the 3rd was buried with just his hand sticking out. So it was a very lucky situation in the regards that only 1 person was killed, but because they had to extricate themselves first, they weren't able to get to their partner even though they had all the appropriate rescue gear. I do want to point out that safety gear alone is not going to ensure that you survive an avalanche, and that's not the point of this slide. But I do believe that it would have made a big difference in a number of the outcomes in these most recent avalanche accidents. So where are these folks from? As an Idahoan, I know that we like to blame problems on just about everybody else except ourselves. But unfortunately, in this case, we can't do that. What the data shows is that 11 out of these fatalities, or 73%, were Idaho residents, and the others lived within 100 miles of their accident site. So you could essentially call them a local. 100 miles is not very far as the crow flies when you're going looking for good skiing and riding. So they are locals, which means it's our problem. We can't blame it on Minnesota, I guess, or somewhere else. It's us. When you look at the age, they're 39-year-old males. All victims were male, and the mean and median age was 39, and that the age group really is in line with national statistics as well, which is fairly similar. So if we just look at the typical person that's getting in trouble in eastern Idaho, they're male, motorized users from Idaho, and they're in that age range of 30 to 49 years old. But the good news is, again, now we have a very defined user group that we can help address the problem. So with the better handle on where the accidents are occurring and who's involved, we revisited our map to try to identify 4 critical use areas. So taking a closer look at where these accidents are happening, this is the from 1950 on data set, and each one of those bright yellow spots is kind of what we termed a critical use area or an accident cluster. The ones that we focus on for our study are the Centennial Mountains, which are up there near Island Park, the Big Holes and the Palisades, which are going to be those two blobs right in the middle there, Big Holes and Palisades, and then the Bear River Range down here in southeastern Idaho. You might ask why we didn't focus on this, which is over near Pocatello. And those accidents actually really didn't fit the pattern, the greater kind of modern pattern that I just showed on the previous slide. A lot of those were older accidents. They were climbers. They were actually just people out playing in the snow, or side country skiers. So they didn't fit the same fit the same pattern that we were seeing in the rest of the areas. So we've been focusing our research on those other areas. If we take a closer look first at the big holes, we started to also sort out what the supporting risk factors were for each one of these areas, because if we can better understand the users, we can make a better solution. So here are the accidents. There's actually 6 fatalities here in total. 2 of those were double fatalities. And in the big holes, as an example, you can see some of the statistics there at the bottom. It's claimed the lives of actually 3 teenagers. It has a network of snowmobile trails that provide really, really easy access to avalanche terrain. And currently, the Big Holes does not have an avalanche forecast. So the Grays River zone from Bridger Teton ends right here on Highway 31. So this area has not historically and currently does not have an avalanche forecast, but that's something that, out of this study, we're hoping that we can affect some change there. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Another prominent accident cluster are the Palisades near Swan Valley Alpine down there. And I mean, this really jumps out as a hot spot for avalanche accidents. Some of the risk factors include a high density of fatalities. So there was one in 2017, one in 2018, one in 2019, and another in 2020. And they're all happening in a pretty tight group. This is real deal avalanche terrain that requires a high level of skill to access, either on a snowmobile or on skis. And it has become a bit of a proving ground, it seems, as well. And 2 professional riders have also perished in this area. It's also difficult to access. And if it's difficult to access, it means you're not getting as much observational data, which means that the forecast product itself is suffering because it doesn't have a high density of observations from the public. It also makes it harder for the forecasters here to access that terrain, especially given that it's over the pass, it takes time to get out there, and you're not going in there unless you're a very good rider and you also have a very good rider with you. So these are also things that we can address through better resources and support for the Avalanche Center. And then if you see one of these other avalanche accidents occurred, again, in an area that was not covered by an avalanche forecast. So if we look down now into the Bear River Range, I'll just share a little video. This was an accident that occurred on February 20th, 2021 on Sherman Peak, which is just north of the Logan forecast zone of the Utah Avalanche Center, which you can see kind of extending right here. There should be sound back there. Okay, well, I will explain what he's saying. He does a very eloquent job, by the way. I was proud of this news reporter. You can see there was a group of, I believe it was 3 riders, and this is his helmet cam footage. He essentially watched the powder cloud go by, got on his radio, and called for, I believe his name was Alan, to respond, and he did not. You can see it was quite a sizable avalanche. A lot of this, the Utah Avalanche Center did an amazing job doing a good write-up and accident investigation on this. You can see there's quite a crowd there, and as it turns out, there was an avalanche rescue course being taught that day in the vicinity, and they were within, I can't recall now whether it was within earshot or if they were contacted somehow via radio. So the entire class came down to help dig this gentleman out. He was buried 12 feet under debris, and you'll see the snowmobile there. So what do we do with all this, and what's next? Like I said, I'm hoping that after this we actually have some degree of optimism because we've identified this problem and it's actually pretty easy to solve. Like we've done this before. This isn't the first place in the United States that has had a rash of accidents like this in an under-supported user group. And we've solved this solution in the past, and it involves a number of things. It involves avalanche education, it involves good avalanche information through forecast centers, and it involves community support and buy-in. Those are really the main three things. I kind of represent the forecasting side of it at first, but we're working on the other two as well. So what are we going to do? The first thing is we're going to improve avalanche information. A close look at the accident map, when before we really figured out where these accidents were, we thought, oh, well, Idaho Falls needs an avalanche center. That was kind of the knee-jerk reaction. But when we looked at where they were either occurring on a forest that already had an existing avalanche forecast, so they were within forecast center boundaries, or they were occurring very near those boundaries. And starting an avalanche center is a big undertaking. So rather than starting a new center, the working group has recommended that we just invest more heavily in Idaho-based avalanche forecasters that then assist those centers and improve the quality of the products on the Idaho state side. The next thing is we need to build community awareness and trust, and part of that is what I'm doing here today. But essentially the other wing of that is we need Idaho-based avalanche forecasters on snowmobiles that live in Idaho. And that is really how we're going to get buy-in from these users. That's how we're going to gain their trust, show that we care and we're there day in and day out, like trying to help them help themselves. And third, I would say that added assets to these avalanche centers, which could be added forecasters, snow rangers, and so forth, is going to provide some flexibility. As Frank showed, this avalanche center covers a huge area, and it takes a lot of resources to do that accurately. And what we're hoping is to get a couple additional forecasters for the Bridger Teton. And once we have those forecasters in place, then they'll be able to talk about expanding potential boundaries to include some of these areas that are underserved currently, including the big holes. So what can you do? And this is, I think, maybe the most important part of this entire presentation. Avalanche accidents are tragic events. I mean, the effects that I think a lot of you are very unfortunately that you're familiar with. And the avalanche program in East Idaho, while it is dire, actually provides us all with a really incredible opportunity. So it's an opportunity to save lives within your own snow community. And I would encourage you not to think about whether it's an us or them, or that's not my problem, or it's over in Idaho, or sorts of things like that. If you go to one of those small communities, you feel that. So like go to Driggs after, an avalanche takes one of the high school kids. So, sorry. What can you do to help? Support your avalanche center. I mean, that's I think our industry needs to come to the forefront and start this effort, and that's why I'm involved, and I believe so passionately in it. Second, you need to build your own community. So, and not to say that you don't have one, I'm just saying that a mentor of mine used to say that a rising tide floats all boats. And I love that saying. So motorized or non-skier or snowboarder, snowshoer, snowblader, we're all part of this one community. And build those connections and we'll all benefit from them. There's an amazing amount of resources in this area on both sides of the pass. And submit observations. Frank already kind of plugged this, but you guys have no idea how much those mean to a forecast center, because they literally can change. Like if we're on that line between moderate and considerable, and you give us that proof that, oh man, what we thought might happen is actually starting to happen, like that could be the difference between a danger rating, and it could save somebody's life. So please share what you guys see out there. And finally, get involved with our working group. If you're interested in what we're doing, please reach out. The next thing I really need help with is all the avalanche educators in this area on both sides of the pass to get together and kind of figure out a plan for how we're going to address the education component. There's so many cool efforts out there, but I think that in talking with a lot of you individually, it seems like we could use a little bit of coordination, and I really want your guys' input there. And finally, I'm really bad at GIS. Like, I just barely was able to create that map. So if one of you is a GIS wizard and you want to help maintain this database, it needs some work, and I'd love your guys' help on that. So finally, I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and I really believe that it shows your commitment to backcountry safety and your community, and I thank you very much, and I'll take some questions.